Hans Christian Andersen. The Angel and the Child. A child has died, and an angel is escorting him to heaven. They wander over the earth for a while, visiting the child's favorite places. Along the way they gather flowers to transplant into the gardens of heaven. The angel takes the child to a poverty-stricken area where a dead field lily lies in a trash heap. The angel salvages the lily and tells the child a beautiful story, explaining why he wants to take this flower in particular to heaven. The angel explains the flower had cheered a dying child. The angel reveals he was that child. The emperor's new clothes. The tale concerns an emperor who has an obsession with fancy new clothes, and spends lavishly on them, at the expense of state matters. One day, two con men visit the emperor's capital. Posing as weavers, they offer to supply him with magnificent clothes that are invisible to those who are incompetent or stupid. The gullible emperor hires them, and they set up looms and pretend to go to work. A succession of officials, starting with the emperor's wise and competent minister, and then ending with the emperor himself, visit them to check their progress. Each sees that the looms are empty but pretends otherwise to avoid being thought a fool. Finally, the weavers report that the emperor's suit is finished. They mime dressing him and he sets off in a procession before the whole city. The townsfolk uncomfortably go along with the pretense, not wanting to appear inept or stupid, until a child blurts out that the emperor is wearing nothing at all. The people then realize that everyone has been fooled. Although startled, the emperor continues the procession, walking more proudly than ever. The Galoshes of Fortune. The story is set in Copenhagen. A group of guests are holding a large party. During the festivity, Counselor of Justice Knapp argues that the Middle Ages were a time better than their own, more specifically the time of King Hans. Suddenly two fairies arrive, dressed up as housemaids. One is old, Dame Care, the other is a minion of Dame Fortune. The dame has brought a pair of galoshes along that can transport whoever wears them to whatever time, place, or condition in life that he desires. And his every wish in regard to time and place will be instantly granted. Dame Care predicts that it will nevertheless make the person unhappy, wishing he was back in the present. As the party concludes, Counselor Knapp decides to go home. He finds the galoshes, puts them on and is sent back to the reign of King Hans. He is not immediately aware of what happened, but does notice that the unpaved streets are full with filth and mud. He notices a procession for the Bishop of Sealand and assumes it's for the bishop from his time period. As he wants to cross the bridge to Palace Square, he notices it's gone and asks two men in a boat where the bridge is and that he wants to go to Christian's Harbor on Little Market Street. The men have no idea what he is talking about and Knapp has trouble understanding their speech, which he assumes is an accent that belongs to people of Bornholm. As a result, he continues his walk, frustrated that not only the bridge is gone and all the lights are out, but that there are also no cabs to take. He decides to walk back to the East Street, but to his amazement the East Gate is now a meadow. Knapp assumes he must be ill and desperately wants to go home, but he can't recognize any of the buildings. As he enters a tavern he tries to find his local paper, but they don't have it. When he notices a woodcut of a meteor over Cologne, he wonders where the owners got this rare old print. As he discusses the content he gets into a conversation in Latin with a man who holds a bachelor in theology. They discuss many topics and Knapp keeps misinterpreting these medieval topics for events that happened in his own lifetime. For instance, he confuses a remark about the Black Plague with a reference to a cholera epidemic in the 19th century. As the evening continues, they all begin to drink more, and Nap is repulsed by the vulgar behavior of the people. He decides to sneak out, but the others pull him back from under the table by his feet, thereby pulling off the galoshes and breaking the spell. Waking up in his own age, Nap assumes it was all a dream and now fancies his own time period as the best. Next, a watchman tries the galoshes on. He wishes to be the lieutenant, because he assumes his life is much better than his. The galoshes do their work, and suddenly the watchman becomes the lieutenant, sitting at his desk. He notices the lieutenant had written a poem called, "If Only I Were Rich," which confesses that the lieutenant actually feels he is short on money and is lonely as a result. Then he realizes he would rather be a watchman, because he at least has a wife and children who share his joy and sorrows. The galoshes then transform him back into himself. The watchman, still unaware what has happened, watches a falling star. He wishes he could travel to the moon, and suddenly the galoshes send him there at the speed of light. There he meets several moon men who all wonder whether Earth is inhabited and decide this must be impossible. Back on Earth, the lifeless body of the watchman is found, and he is brought to a hospital, where they take his shoes off, breaking the spell again. He awakens and declares it to have been the most terrible night he had ever experienced. As the galoshes remain in the hospital, one of the young night interns tries them on. His task is to guard the hospital fence, but he wishes to get out for a while, wondering whether he could get his head through the fence and escape. As soon as he thinks this, his head is stuck and he's unable to pull it back. He struggles for a while, until he wishes he was free again, which is granted by the galoshes. The next day, the intern attends a theatrical play called My Grandmother's Spectacles in Kanike Street. The spectacles in the play are able to let anyone who wears them read the future from people's faces. The internee wishes he had such a pair of glasses, and soon enough he has them. As he witnesses into the spectators on the front row's hearts, he notices many bizarre views. He concludes he must have had too much blood rushing to his head and wishes he could take a Russian steam bath. Suddenly he is indeed there, but fully clothed and scaring off the other people in the room. He has enough sense to pull himself together and tell everybody it's part of a bet. He then returns home, and the next day he has a blistered back. Meanwhile, the watchman picks up the galoshes at the hospital and turns them in at the police station, where they are accidentally given to a clerk whose galoshes happen to have been lost too. During a walk, the clerk meets a friend who is a poet and desires to live his life, for it seems to be much more enjoyable than his. At first the clerk enjoys being a poet full of inspiration. Then he wishes he was a lark, but is caught by a little boy and sold off to a family, where he is put inside a cage. He talks with a canary and parrot, who both lament the days when they were still free. As it so happens, the cage door is open and the clerk tries to fly away, but is attacked by a cat. He manages to fly back to his own home, where the spell is broken again. Then the fairy tale concludes with the clerk's neighbor, a theological student, asking for the galoshes. The clerk gives them to him. As the student walks away, he wishes he could travel to Switzerland and Italy, whereupon he is on top of the Mont Blanc. In the freezing weather, he wishes he was on the other side of the Alps, where he ends up in Italy, near Lake Trasimene. There he enjoys the beautiful landscapes, but he is confronted with the local people's hunger and poverty. He concludes that it would be better off if his body could rest, while the spirit flies on without it. The galoshes grant his wish, and he is now peacefully dead. Andersen concludes with a quote by Solon, "Call no man happy until he rests in his grave." Dame Care then tells the other fairy that her predictions have indeed all come true. though she does grant the student a favor. She takes off his galoshes and takes them back with her, causing him to be brought back to life. The Goblin and the Grocer. Once, a student lived in an attic while a grocer lived on the first floor with a nis, or house goblin. Because the grocer treated the nis for Christmas with a dish of porridge. Danish. Fad grad. With a large lump of butter in the middle. The nis was attached to the grocer. 12, 15. One day, the student came to buy cheese and candles. Then he discovered that his cheese was wrapped in a page from a poetry book, so he bought the book instead of the cheese, and joked that the grocer knew nothing about poetry. The goblin, offended by the joke, used magic to make everything in the room speak, and they all agreed that poetry was useless. The goblin went to tell the student, but he saw a beautiful, marvelous tree of light in the student's room, the most splendid thing he had ever seen. He kept going back to watch the tree of light through the peephole, but could not stay there, for the grocer gave him jam and butter. One day when there was a fire, the red-capped nis ran to save the poetry book, and realized that he thought the book the greatest treasure in the house. Still, he decided to divide his time between the grocer and the student, because the student provided no Christmas porridge, Jolgrad. The Ice Maiden. This story tells the tale of Rudy, a boy who lost both his parents and goes to live with his uncle. The reader is first introduced to Rudy as he sells toy houses made by his grandfather. Rudy grows up to become a skilled mountain climber and huntsman. He has fallen in love with the miller's daughter, Babette. However, the miller does not approve of the union and gives Rudy the impossible task of climbing to the top of a dangerous mountain and bringing back a live baby eaglet. While Babette was off visiting her godmother, she caught the attention of her cousin and flirted with him, which reveals in Rudy a growing jealousy. When Rudy finds the cousin climbing up a tree into Babette's window, Babette is enraged that Rudy is yelling at her cousin and tells him to leave. On his way home, Rudy comes across a beautiful maiden who has appeared in his life before. It's the Ice Maiden, who killed his mother and marked him as her own when he was a baby. He is angry at Babette and soon finds himself kissing the Ice Maiden. Rudy goes back to Babette and begs for her forgiveness. Their wedding day is near and they travel to the godmother's house to be wed at a church nearby. The night after their arrival, Babette has an awful dream that she cheats on Rudy with her cousin. One night before the wedding, Babette decides she wants to go to a small island with just enough room for the two of them to dance. As they sit and talk together, Babette notices the boat is slipping away. Rudy dives into the water after it, but the Ice Maiden kisses him one last time and he drowns. Babette is left alone on the island crying over the death of her loved one, but nobody can hear her over the storm. The Nightingale. In the gardens of the Emperor of China lived a nightingale whose song was more beautiful than the palace itself and was storied all over the world. When the emperor received a book from the Emperor of Japan, he was astonished to read about the nightingale, because he had never heard of it, nor had anyone in his court. He commanded that the nightingale be brought before him to sing. With the help of a poor kitchen girl, the nightingale was found and brought to the emperor, where he sang so beautifully that the emperor was moved to tears and made him a guest at court. Soon after, the emperor received a new gift, a jeweled nightingale automaton that also sang. This nightingale's song was pretty, but always the same. The real nightingale, no longer appreciated, flew out of the palace while no one was looking. The emperor placed the artificial nightingale at his bedside and banished the real nightingale for his desertion. The artificial bird sang the emperor to sleep each night until its cogs wore down. The bird was repaired, but it could be played only once a year. 5 years later the emperor fell ill, and one night death sat on his chest showing him the deeds of his past. The emperor wished for the artificial nightingale to sing away the unpleasant memories, but it was silent. Then a song erupted through the window, where the real nightingale was perched. The song restored the emperor's health and persuaded death to leave him in peace. The nightingale declined to become a guest in the palace again, but offered to come when he would and sing about all that he had seen in the kingdom, if the emperor agreed to keep this a secret between them. The Princess and the Pea. The story tells of a prince who wants to marry a princess but is having difficulty finding a suitable wife. He meets many princesses, but is never sure that they are real. In Danish, rigtig literally means rightful princesses, until one stormy night, when a mysterious young woman drenched with rain seeks shelter in the prince's castle. She claims to be a princess, but the prince's mother, the queen, has doubts. She decides to test their unexpected guest by placing a hard uncooked pea in the bed she is offered for the night, covered by 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. In the morning, the mysterious woman tells her hosts that she endured a rather restless night, kept awake by something in the bed that made her feel uncomfortable. The prince's family realizes that she is a princess after all, since only a true princess could be so delicate. The prince and the princess are happily married, and the story ends with the pea being placed in a museum, where it might still remain. The Red Shoes. After her mother's death, a peasant girl named Karen is adopted while still very young by a rich old lady and, as such, grows up vain and spoiled. Before her adoption, Karen had a roughly made pair of red shoes. After, she has her adoptive mother buy her a pair of red shoes fit for a princess. Karen is so enamored of her new shoes that she wears them to church, but the old lady tells her, "This is highly improper, you must only wear black shoes in church." The following Sunday, Karen is unable to resist putting the red shoes on again. As she is about to enter the church, she meets a mysterious old soldier with a red beard. "Oh, what beautiful shoes for dancing," the soldier says. "Never come off when you dance," he tells the shoes, and he taps each of the shoes with his hand. After church, Karen cannot resist taking a few dance steps, and off she goes, as though the shoes controlled her, but she finally manages to stop them after a few minutes. After her adoptive mother becomes ill and passes away, Karen doesn't attend her funeral, choosing to go to a dance instead. Once again, the red shoes take control. This time, she is unable to stop dancing. An angel appears to her, bearing a sword, and condemns her to dance even after she dies, as a warning to vain children everywhere. Karen begs for mercy, but the red shoes take her away before she hears the angel's reply. Karen finds an executioner and asks him to chop off her feet. He does so, however, the shoes continue to dance, even with Karen's amputated feet inside them. The executioner gives her a pair of wooden feet and crutches. Thinking that she has suffered enough for the red shoes, Karen decides to go to church so people can see her. Yet her amputated feet, still in the red shoes, dance before her, barring the way. The following Sunday she tries again, thinking she is at least as good as the others in church. Once again, the dancing red shoes bar the way. When Sunday comes again, Karen dares not go to church. Instead, she sits alone at home and prays to God for help. The angel reappears, now bearing a spray of roses, and gives Karen the mercy she asked for. Her heart becomes so filled with peace and joy that it bursts. Her soul flies on to heaven, where no one mentions the red shoes. The steadfast tin soldier. On his birthday, a boy receives a set of 25 toy soldiers, all cast from one old tin spoon, and arrays them on a tabletop. One soldier stands on a single leg because, as he was the last one cast, there was not enough metal to make him whole. Nearby, the soldier spies a pretty paper ballerina with a spangle on her sash. She, too, is standing on one leg, and the soldier falls in love. That night, a goblin among the toys in the form of a jack-in-the-box, who also loves the ballerina, angrily warns the soldier to take his eyes off her, but the soldier ignores him. The next day, the soldier falls from a windowsill, presumably the work of the goblin, and lands in the street. Two boys find the soldier, place him in a paper boat, and set him sailing in the gutter. The boat and its passenger wash into a storm drain, where a rat demands the soldier pay a toll. Sailing on, the boat is washed into a canal, where the tin soldier is swallowed by a fish. When this fish is caught and cut open, the tin soldier finds himself once again on the tabletop before the ballerina. Inexplicably, the boy throws the tin soldier into the fire, which is most likely the work of the jack-in-the-box goblin. A wind blows the ballerina into the fire with him. She is consumed by it. The maid cleans the fireplace in the morning and finds that the soldier has melted into a little tin heart, along with the ballerina's spangle, which is now burned as black as coal. The swineherd. A poor prince wants to marry the emperor's daughter and sends her two beautiful gifts, a nightingale and a rose. The princess rejects the humble gifts because they're real and natural, rather than artificial. The prince then disguises himself and applies for the position of swineherd at the palace. Once on the job, he creates a musical pot. The princess slogs through the mud to the swineherd's hut and pays 10 kisses for the pot. When the swineherd follows the pot with the creation of a musical rattle, she pays 100 kisses for it. The emperor, disgusted that his daughter would kiss a swineherd for a toy, casts her out. The prince, having found the princess unworthy of his love, washes his face, dons his royal attire, and spurns the princess as her father did. The princess is left outside the palace door singing dolefully. Thumbelina. A woman yearning for a child asks a witch for advice, and is presented with barley which she is told to go home and plant. In the first English translation of 1847 by Mary Howlett, the tale opens with a beggar woman giving a peasant's wife a barleycorn in exchange for food. After the barleycorn is planted and sprouts, a tiny girl named Thumbelina, Thumbelise, emerges from its flower. One night, Thumbelina, asleep in her walnut shell cradle, is carried off by a toad who wants her as a bride for her son. With the help of friendly fish and a butterfly, Thumbelina escapes the toad and her son, and drifts on a lily pad until captured by a cockchafer who later discards her when his friends reject her company. Thumbelina tries to protect herself from the elements. When winter comes, she is in desperate straits. She is finally given shelter by an old field mouse and tends her dwelling in gratitude. Thumbelina sees a swallow who is injured while visiting a mole, a neighbor of the field mouse. She meets the swallow one night and finds out what happened to him. She keeps on visiting the swallow during midnight without telling the field mouse and tries to help him gain strength, and she frequently spends time with him singing songs and telling him stories and listening to his stories in the winter until spring arrives. The swallow, after becoming healthy, promises that he would come to that spot again and flies away saying goodbye to Thumbelina. At the end of winter, the mouse suggests Thumbelina marry the mole, but Thumbelina finds the prospect of being married to such a creature repulsive because he spends all his days underground and never sees the sun or sky, even though he is impressive with his knowledge of ancient history and lots of other topics. The field mouse keeps pushing Thumbelina into the marriage, insisting the mole is a good match for her. Eventually Thumbelina sees little choice but to agree, but cannot bear the thought of the mole keeping her underground and never seeing the sun. At the last minute, Thumbelina escapes the situation by fleeing to a far land with the swallow. In a sunny field of flowers, Thumbelina meets a tiny flower fairy prince just her size and to her liking. They eventually wed. She receives a pair of wings to accompany her husband on his travels from flower to flower, and a new name, Maya. In the end, the swallow is heartbroken once Thumbelina marries the flower fairy prince, and flies off, eventually arriving at a small house. There, he tells Thumbelina's story to a man who is implied to be Andersen himself, who chronicles the story in a book. The Ugly Duckling. After a mother duck's eggs hatch, one of the ducklings is perceived by the other animals as an ugly little creature and suffers much verbal and physical abuse. He wanders from the barnyard and lives with wild ducks and geese until hunters slaughter the flocks. He finds a home with an old woman, but her cat and hen tease and taunt him mercilessly, and once again he sets off alone. The duckling sees a flock of migrating wild swans. He is delighted and excited but cannot join them because he is too young, ugly, and unable to fly. When winter arrives, a farmer finds and carries the freezing duckling home, but he is frightened by the farmer's noisy children and flees the house. The duckling spends a miserable winter alone outdoors, mostly hiding in a cave on the lake that partly freezes over. The duckling, now having fully grown and matured, cannot endure a life of solitude and hardship anymore. He decides to throw himself at a flock of swans, feeling that it is better to be killed by such beautiful birds than to live a life of ugliness. He is shocked and the swans welcome and accept him, only to realize by looking at his reflection in the water that he had been not a duckling but a swan all this time. The flock takes to the air, and he spreads his wings to take flight with the rest of his new family. The Little Match Girl. On a freezing New Year's Eve, a poor young girl, frozen, shivering, bareheaded and barefoot, unsuccessfully tries to sell matches in the street. Afraid to go home because her father would beat her for failing to sell any matches and not earning even a single penny, she huddles in the alley between two houses and lights matches, one by one, to warm herself. In the flame of the matches, she sees a series of comforting visions: a warm iron stove, a lovely roasted goose, and a great glorious Christmas tree. Each vision disappears as its match burns out. In the sky, she sees a shooting star, which her late grandmother had told her meant that someone is on their way to heaven. In the flame of the next match she sees her late grandmother, the only person that ever treated her with love and kindness. To keep the vision of her grandmother alive as long as possible, the girl lights the entire bundle of matches she has. When the matches are gone, the girl freezes to death in the cold weather, as her grandmother carries her soul to heaven. The next morning, passers-by find the girl's body with a smile on her face and express pity, but they do not know about the wonderful visions she had seen or how happy she is with her grandmother in heaven. The tallow candle. A tallow candle, whose parents are a sheep and a melting pot, becomes more and more disheartened as it cannot find a purpose in life. It meets a tinderbox who lights a flame on the candle, and it finally finds its right place in life and spreads joy and happiness for itself and its fellow creatures. The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid lives in a utopian underwater kingdom with her father, the Sea King, her paternal grandmother, and her 5 older sisters, each one of them born a year apart. The Little Mermaid is fascinated by the world above the sea and human beings, and keeps a statue of a human boy in her garden in the palace. Lonely and feeling isolated from her family, she yearns to explore the world above, and constantly asks her grandmother to tell her stories of humans. When a mermaid turns 15, she is permitted to swim to the surface for the first time to catch a glimpse of the world above. When the 6 mermaids become old enough, each of them visits the upper world one at a time every year. As each returns, the Little Mermaid listens longingly to their various descriptions of the world inhabited by human beings. The elder sisters, however, soon become jaded of the world above and are content to remain below the sea. When the Little Mermaid's turn comes, she rises up to the surface, watches a birthday celebration being held on a ship in honor of a handsome prince, and falls in love with him from a safe distance. A violent storm then hits, sinking the ship, and the Little Mermaid saves the prince from drowning. She delivers him unconscious to the shore near a temple. Here, the Little Mermaid waits until a young woman from the temple and her ladies-in-waiting find him. To her dismay, the prince never sees the Little Mermaid or even realizes that it was she who had originally saved his life. The Little Mermaid becomes melancholic and asks her grandmother if humans can live forever. Her grandmother explains that humans have a much shorter lifespan than mermaids, around 300 years, but that they have an eternal soul that lives on in heaven, while mermaids turn to sea foam at death and cease to exist. The Little Mermaid, longing for the prince and an eternal soul, visits the sea witch who lives in a dangerous part of the ocean. Although the witch warns the Little Mermaid that her attempts to win the love of the prince are doomed, she willingly helps her by selling her a potion that gives her legs in exchange for her voice, her tongue, as the Little Mermaid has the most enchanting voice in the entire world. The witch warns the Little Mermaid that once she becomes a human, she will never be able to return to the sea. Consuming the potion will make her feel as if a sword is being passed through her body. When she recovers, she will have 2 human legs and will be able to dance as no human has ever danced before. However, the pain of losing her tail will never leave her. She will constantly feel as if she is walking on sharp knives, and her feet will bleed terribly. Moreover, she will obtain a soul only if she wins the love of the prince and marries him, for then a part of his soul will flow into her. Otherwise, at dawn on the first day after he marries someone else, the Little Mermaid will die with a broken heart and dissolve into sea foam upon the waves. After she agrees to the arrangement, the Little Mermaid swims up to the surface near the prince's castle and drinks the potion. The liquid feels like a sword piercing her body and she passes out on the shore, naked. She is found by the prince, who is mesmerized by her beauty and grace, even though he discovers that she is mute. Most of all, he likes to see her dance, and she dances for him despite suffering excruciating pain with every step. Soon, the Little Mermaid becomes the prince's favorite companion and accompanies him on many of his outings. As she is mute, he confides in her his deepest thoughts and feelings, but he does not fall in love with her at all. He regards her more as a pet than a person, and has her sleep on the floor outside his bedroom door. When the prince's parents encourage him to marry the neighboring princess in an arranged marriage, the prince tells the Little Mermaid he will not because he does not love the princess. He goes on to say that he can only love the young woman from the temple, whom he believes rescued him. It turns out that the princess from the neighboring kingdom was the temple woman, as she was sent to the temple for her education. The prince declares his love for her, and the royal wedding is announced at once. The mermaid sisters give the knife to the Little Mermaid. The prince and princess celebrate their new marriage aboard a wedding ship, and the Little Mermaid's heart breaks. She thinks of all that she has sacrificed and of all the pain she has endured for the prince. She despairs, thinking of the death that awaits her, but before dawn, her sisters rise out of the water and bring her a dagger that the sea witch has given them in exchange for their long, beautiful hair. If the little mermaid kills the prince and lets his blood drip on her feet, she will become a mermaid once more, all her suffering will end, and she will live out her full life in the ocean with her family. However, the little mermaid cannot bring herself to kill the sleeping prince lying with his new wife, and she throws the dagger and herself off the ship into the water just as dawn breaks. Her body dissolves into foam, but instead of ceasing to exist, she feels the warm sun and discovers that she has turned into a luminous and ethereal earthbound spirit, a daughter of the air. As the little mermaid ascends into the atmosphere, she is greeted by other daughters, who tell her she has become like them because she strove with all her heart to obtain an immortal soul. Because of the little mermaid's sacrifice, she is given a chance to do good deeds for all her lifespan, 300 years like the mere people, and she will receive her soul and rise up into heaven when her lifespan ends.